When a man throws another over a bridge in a desperate bid to bury his darkest secrets, he doesn't realize someone is watching hidden among the reeds. A 13-year-old boy makes a split-second decision to dive into the river. What unfolds next is a story of courage, betrayal, and how one boy's bravery uncovers a truth powerful enough to shatter lives. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from and if you believe that a single act of bravery can change lives forever. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The sun was beginning its descent, casting a golden sheen over the gently flowing river. 13-year-old Mick sat crouched in the tall bushes, his fishing rod resting against a rock. This spot was his haven, a place where the noise of home could be drowned out by the hum of cicadas and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. The scent of damp earth mixed with the sharp tang of the river filled the air, and Mick took a deep breath, savoring the rare calm since his father's death in a factory accident 5 years ago. Malik's mother, Tanya, had worked tirelessly as a nurse to keep their small household afloat. Their 2-bedroom home with its peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture was a far cry from what Tanya had dreamed of for her son. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for Mick, it was a necessity. A good catch meant dinner that wouldn't stretch their already thin grocery budget. Today though, the river was unusually stubborn, the line staying taut but unyielding. Still, Mick didn't mind sitting here. Away from the endless hum of life's worries was enough. His peace shattered when a loud thud reverberated through the air, jolting him upright. Malik instinctively ducked deeper into the bushes, his heart pounding. Peering through the leaves, he spotted a black sedan stopped in the middle of the bridge just upstream. What the he murmured under his breath. The car's door swung open and a figure stepped out, moving toward the railing. Malik squinted, trying to make out what was happening. His breath caught when he saw the figure lean over and shove something or someone off the bridge. The splash that followed sent a chill down his spine. The sedan's tire screeched as it sped off, leaving only the faint echo of its engine in the air. Mick's eyes darted to the river, scanning for signs of what or who had been thrown over. Then he saw it, a hand. Malik froze, panic gripping him. Someone was in the water, unmoving, drifting with the current. His first instinct was to run to find someone, anyone, but the river was fast, and whoever that was didn't have much time. "Come on, Malik," he muttered to himself, trying to steel his nerves. He kicked off his sneakers, dropped his rod, and sprinted down the muddy bank. The sharp rocks bit into his feet, but he didn't care. By the time he reached the edge, the figure was already being carried farther downstream. Without thinking, he plunged into the water. The cold was a shock and the current was stronger than it looked. For a moment, Mick flailed his arms and legs, fighting against the pull of the river. But then he saw the figure again, closer now. An older man, his face pale and slack, bobbing lifelessly. "Hold on," Malik shouted. Though he knew the man couldn't hear him, pushing against the current, he swam towards the man. Every muscle in his body burned and his lungs screamed for air, but he finally reached him. Grabbing the man under the arms, Malik tried to keep both their heads above water. The man's weight dragged him down, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he wouldn't make it. No, Malik gritted through clenched teeth. With one last burst of effort, he kicked toward the shore, dragging the man through the churning water. His fingers scraped against the muddy bank, and he heaved the man onto the grass. Collapsing beside him, Malik rolled onto his back, gasping for air. His chest heaved as he stared up at the sky, now tinged with shades of orange and pink. It felt like hours before he finally turned to look at the man he'd pulled from the river. The man was older, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair plastered to his head. His face was gaunt, and there was a deep gash on his temple, blood trickling down his cheek. Mick's stomach turned at the sight. But then he noticed the faint rise and fall of the man's chest. "He's alive," Malik whispered in relief. But barely. The man's breaths were shallow, his body limp. Malik patted his pockets, remembering his phone, only to realize it wasn't there. He must have left it in his rush to the river. The hospital, the only one in the area, was over an hour away. Even if he found someone to help, they might not get there in time. Malik's mind raced, as tried to think he couldn't leave the man here. The sun was setting, and the riverbank would be crawling with animals soon. Looking back at the man, Mick made a decision. "I'm taking you home," he said aloud, more to himself than the unconscious stranger. The wooden door creaked open as Malik staggered inside, supporting the elderly man's weight with trembling Arms. His mother Tanya stood in the kitchen scrubbing a pot. The clatter of Malik's footsteps on the threshold caught her attention, and she spun around. Malik? What? Her eyes widened at the sight of the unconscious man slumped against Malik's shoulder. She dropped the pot into the sink and rushed over. Who is this? She demanded, her voice rising. I found him. Malik panted, his breath ragged in the river. Someone threw him off the bridge. What? Tanya's voice cracked with disbelief. She hesitated for a split second before moving to grab the man's other arm, helping Malik lower him onto the worn-out sofa. Why didn't you call someone? My phone, I left it. At the river, Malik stammered, still catching his breath. The hospital's too far. I didn't know what else to do. Tanya stared at the man. His face was pale, his clothes soaked and clinging to his frail frame. She took a step back, shaking her head. This is serious, Malik. We need to call for help. No, Malik blurted out. We can't wait. He's alive, but barely. Please, Mom, you can help him. Tanya hesitated, her gaze flicking between her son's desperate eyes and the stranger on the couch. Finally, she let out a sharp sigh. Fine, move aside. Tanya grabbed her first aid kit from the cabinet and knelt beside the man. Her fingers moved, quickly checking his pulse and lifting his eyelids. Pulse is weak, she murmured, her voice steady but strained. She pulled a towel from a nearby chair and began cleaning the blood off the gash on his temple. Malik hovered close, watching her work. Malik, get me some clean water, Tanya ordered. Malik scrambled to the kitchen, returning with a bowl. Tanya dipped the towel in and pressed it gently to the man's wound. This is deep, she muttered, mostly to herself. He'll need stitches, but we'll have to make do for now. As she worked, Tanya noticed more signs of trauma, bruises along his wrists, as if they'd been tightly bound, and dark marks on his ribs. She pressed her lips into a thin line. Mom, is he going to be okay? Malik asked, his voice small. I don't know, Tanya admitted, dabbing antiseptic onto the cut. Now tell me what exactly happened. Malik shifted uncomfortably. I was fishing by the river when I saw someone throw him off the bridge. Tanya froze, the words sinking in. She turned to her son, her expression a mixture of concern, and disbelief. Did you see who it was? No, I was too far away, but a car stopped in the middle of the bridge. Someone got out and threw him over. Tanya's hands faltered for a moment before she steadied herself. You're sure about this? Yes. Malik nodded firmly. It was a black sedan. It sped off right after Tanya let out a slow breath, her face tightening. What have you gotten us into? Malik swallowed hard. I don't think that, Fom. I just knew he was going to drown if I didn't save him. Tanya didn't respond right away. She focused on wrapping a bandage around the man's head. We'll keep him stable for now. Once he wakes up, we'll figure out what to do that evening. Tanya and Malik sat together on the couch, the stranger resting on a makeshift cot they'd set up on the floor. His breathing was steady, but he hadn't stirred. The old TV flickered in the dimly lit room, the evening news playing in the background. Mick poked at his dinner, his appetite gone. Tanya leaned forward, her arms crossed, keeping an eye on the man. Breaking news tonight, the anchor announced. Richard Greaves, a prominent billionaire and philanthropist, has been reported missing. Greaves, known for his extensive charity work and leadership in the Greaves Foundation, was last seen leaving his estate early this morning. Malik froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Mom, Tanya said, her eyes glued to the screen. The report continued, showing a picture of an elderly man with sharp features and silver hair. Authorities say his car was found abandoned near the Riverway Bridge earlier today, sparking fears of foul play. A massive search is underway. Anyone with information is urged to contact local authorities immediately. Tanya turned to look at the man lying on the floor. Her stomach churned as she compared his face to the one on the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. It's him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mick's eyes widened. You mean he's the billionaire, the one they're looking for? Tanya nodded slowly. Yes, Malik, that man in our house is Richard Greaves. For a moment, they sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation sinking in. What do we do now, Malik? Finally asked Tanya. Stood, her expression firm. We wait. If he wakes up, we need to know what happened. Until then, we keep quiet. No one can know he's here, but what if the people who heard him come looking? Malik's voice wavered. Tanya placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. We'll deal with that. If it happens, this just got a lot more complicated. Do you think Malik did the right thing by taking the man home, instead of calling the authorities? Could his bravery have unintended consequences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're intrigued to see how this story unfolds, don't forget to like this video and keep watching to find out. The first sign of movement came just after dawn. Malik was curled up in a chair by the cot, his head resting against his arm while Tanya busied herself in the kitchen. A low groan pulled Malik from the edge of sleep. "Mom, he's waking up." Malik scrambled to his feet as Richard stirred his face, twisting in discomfort. Tanya rushed over, kneeling beside the cot. "Sir, can you hear me?" Richard's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused and hazy. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. After a moment he managed to rasp, "Where am I?" "You're in my home," Tanya said gently. "My son found you by the river. You were hurt." Richard blinked, his brows furrowing as if trying to process her words. He raised a trembling hand to his bandaged head, wincing at the touch. "The river," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You need to rest," Tanya said firmly, adjusting the blanket covering him. "No, wait." Richard's voice grew a little stronger, though his words were still slurred. What happened to me? You don't remember?" Mick asked, stepping closer. Richard's eyes locked onto Malik, confusion clouding expression. "No, I don't. I can't." His voice trailed off, and his head fell back against the pillow. Later that morning, Richard sat propped up against a pile of cushions, sipping weak tea that Tanya had made for him. His hands trembled slightly, but the warmth seemed to help. Mick hovered nearby, watching him intently. "Did you save me?" Richard said suddenly, his voice steadier now, but still tinged with uncertainty. Malik nodded. "Yeah, I pulled you out of the river. You were floating, barely breathing." Richard's hand tightened around the cup, his knuckles whitening. "The river," he murmured, staring into the tea as though it held answers. "You don't remember how you got there?" Tanya asked, sitting across from him. He shook his head slowly. It's all blurry. I remember driving. There was a car, another car." Then his eyes narrowed, and he winced as if the memory caused him physical pain. "I don't know. I saw someone throw you off the bridge," Malik blurted out. Richard's gaze snapped to him, his eyes widening. "What?" "There was a black sedan," Malik said, his voice trembling slightly. "It stopped in the middle of the bridge. Someone got out, and then they threw you over." Richard leaned back, his face pale, his breathing grew heavier, and Tanya stepped in quickly. "Malik, that's enough for now. He needs time." Malik frowned but nodded, stepping away to give Richard space. "It's okay," Richard said quietly. After a moment, his voice calmer, he glanced at Malik, his lips twitched into the barest hint of a smile. "Thank you for saving me." Over the next day, Richard's strength began to return, though his memory remained patchy. Tanya made him light meals, fussing over his condition despite his insistence that he was fine. Malik, meanwhile, spent every free moment sitting by Richard's side, peppering him with questions. "Do you remember your name yet?" Malik asked. One afternoon, leaning forward eagerly, Richard hesitated, his brow furrowing. Richard Greaves," he said slowly, as if testing the words like the guy on the news. Malik's eyes widened. Tanya, who was folding laundry nearby, shot Malik a warning look. "Malik, don't push." "It's fine," Richard said, waving a hand. He turned to Malik. "The news." "Huh? What are they saying?" Malik hesitated. "They said you were missing, that they found your car near the bridge." Richard let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders sagging. "So they know I'm gone." "Good. Why is that good?" Malik asked, his curiosity undeterred. Richard looked at him, a small smile playing on his lips. "You ask a lot of questions, don't you?" Malik shrugged. "I just want to know for a moment." Richard said nothing. Then he leaned forward slightly. "Because it means they're looking for me, and when the right people find me, we'll set things straight." "What things?" Malik pressed, but Richard didn't answer. By the third day, Richard was walking around the house with a slight limp, his strength returning bit by bit. He watched as Malik practiced tying fishing lures on the porch, the boy's hands nimble and focused. "You like fishing, huh?" Richard asked, easing himself into a chair nearby. "Yeah," Mick said without looking up. "It's peaceful, and sometimes I catch stuff for dinner." Richard nodded, leaning back. "I used to fish when I was your age. My father taught me, said it was the best way to clear your head." Malik looked up, surprised. "You don't seem like the fishing type." "Oh," Richard raised an eyebrow. "And what type do I seem like?" Malik shrugged. "I don't know. You just seem like you'd have other people to do that stuff for you." Richard laughed, a deep, hearty sound that surprised both of them. "Well, you're not wrong. Haven't held a rod in years, but I wasn't always this." He gestured vaguely at himself. "What were you before?" Malik asked. Richard's smile faded slightly, and he looked out at the river in the distance. "A kid trying to figure things out, just like you and that." Moment Malik saw a vulnerability in Richard that made him seem less like a mysterious stranger and more like a person, someone who had lived and struggled and made it through. "Thanks again," Richard said quietly, breaking the silence, "for saving me. It means more than you know." Malik grinned. "You already said that. Doesn't mean I can't say it again," Richard replied, his smile returning. The morning air was thick with tension. As Richard sat on the sofa absently rubbing his temple, Tanya poured him another cup of tea, her watchful eyes catching every flicker of expression on his face. Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, eager yet apprehensive, as if sensing the storm brewing inside. "Richard, I remember now," Richard said finally, his voice low but firm. Tanya paused, her hand tightening around the teapot. "What do you mean? What do you remember?" Richard took a deep breath, his hand trembling slightly as he set the cup down the bridge. "The man who threw me over." He looked at them, his eyes sharp and filled with something darker than just fear. "It was Alan, my son-in-law." Malik's mouth fell open. "Your son-in-law?" Richard nodded, his jaw tight. "He's married to my daughter Emma. I trusted him, gave him access to everything, my finances, my foundation, my entire estate." Tanya frowned, crossing her arms. Why would he do something like this? What could drive a man to try to kill his own father-in-law? Richard's expression hardened, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Greed. That's what drives men like Alan." Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly as he spoke, each word weighted with anger and betrayal. "For years, I let Alan handle my affairs. I thought I was giving Emma a stable future by keeping him involved, but recently I started noticing discrepancies, small at first, missing funds here, inflated invoices there. But when I dug deeper," he trailed off, his face darkening. "What did you find?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found that Alan had been siphoning money from my accounts for years," Richard said, his voice trembling with controlled fury. "He set up shell companies, falsified transactions. He was using my money to fund his own ventures, buying luxury properties, cars, things Emma knew nothing about." Tanya's eyes widened. "And you confronted him?" Richard nodded. "I invited him over to my study late at night. I wanted to give him a chance to explain himself, to own up to what he had done. But when I laid out the evidence, he snapped, claimed I was trying to ruin his life, to destroy his marriage. He said I was jealous of him." Malik frowned. "That doesn't make any sense." "No, it doesn't," Richard said bitterly. "But to Alan, it didn't matter. He lost control, started shouting, throwing things, and then he paused, his hand unconsciously drifting to the bandage on his temple. "He attacked me. I tried to fight him off, but he overpowered me. Next thing I knew, I was in his car." And then his voice faltered. "The bridge," Tanya finished for him, her voice tight. Richard nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "He must have thought I was dead when he threw me over. He didn't count on someone like Malik being there to save me." Malik straightened, a mixture of pride and unease washing over him. "But what about your daughter? Emma doesn't know, does she?" Richard shook his head. "No, she loves him. At least she thinks she does. She has no idea what kind of man he really is." The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Tanya stood by the window, peering out as if expecting Alan to show up at any moment. "We can't keep this quiet," she said, finally turning to face Richard. "This is attempted murder. Richard, we need to call the police." Richard stiffened, his hands gripping the armrests of the sofa. "Not yet," Tanya repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean, not yet? That man tried to kill you. He could come back to finish the job." "I know that," Richard snapped, his voice rising for the first time. He softened almost immediately, running a hand through his silver hair. "I know, but if we go to the police now, without any preparation, Alan will deny everything he has. Resources, connections. He'll twist this around and make it look like I'm the one lying." Tanya crossed her arms. "So what's your plan? Just wait here and hope he doesn't find you?" "No," Richard said firmly. "I need time. Time to gather evidence, to make sure Alan can't wriggle his way out of this. I have documents, records, everything to prove what he's done, but they're at my house and my office." "And how do you plan on getting them?" Tanya asked. "I don't know yet," Richard admitted, his shoulders slumping. "But I can't go to the police until I have them." Tanya sighed, her expression torn. "Richard, I understand where you're coming from, but my priority is my son. If Alan finds out you're here," she glanced at Malik, who was watching them both intently, "I can't put my family in danger." "I'll make sure that doesn't happen," Richard said quickly. I'll leave if I have to, but please just give me a day or two to figure this out. Tanya hesitated, her protective instincts whirring. With her empathy finally, she nodded, though her expression remained grim. You have 2 days, Richard, but after that we're going to the police with or without your evidence. Fair enough, Richard said quietly, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. Malik looked between them, his young face serious. If you need help, I can know. Tanya cut in sharply. You've done enough, Mick. You saved his life, but this isn't your fight. But Mom, no buts, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Richard placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, offering a small smile. Your mom's right. You've already done more for me than I can ever repay. Let the adults handle this now. Malik frowned but nodded reluctantly, his gaze dropping to the floor that evening. As the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Richard sat by the window, staring out at the darkened street. Tanya's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't blame her for being cautious. Alan was dangerous, more dangerous than anyone in this house truly understood, but Richard also knew one thing for certain. Alan wasn't going to get away with this. Alan Greaves paced the polished floor of his office, his usually composed demeanor fraying at the edges. The news from the private investigator he'd hired was troubling, very troubling. The river search team had found nobody. Richard wasn't where Alan had expected him to be. This isn't possible, Alan muttered, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. He turned sharply to face the investigator, a wiry man with a thick file under his arm. It's possible he survived, the investigator said cautiously. The current wasn't as strong that night. Someone could have pulled him out. Alan's lips curled into a sneer. Someone who that area is practically deserted. Did you find anything? Anyone? The investigator hesitated before replying. There was a boy, a local kid. Someone reported seeing him near the bridge that evening, but we don't have a name. Yet we're looking into it. Alan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Find him, he snapped, and whoever else is involved. I want this handled quietly, no loose ends. Yes, sir, the investigator replied, already stepping back toward the door as the man left. Alan poured himself a drink, his hand trembling slightly as he raised the glass to his lips. If Richard was alive, it wouldn't just be his embezzlement that was exposed. Attempted murder would land him behind bars for life. Alan couldn't let that happen. Malik was walking home from school when he spotted the car for the first time. It was sleek black and parked just down the street from his house. At first he thought nothing of it. It was just a car, but when he saw it again, the next day parked in the same spot, his unease grew. Mom, do we know anyone who drives a black car? Malik asked that evening as Tanya prepared dinner. Tanya paused, turning to look at him. Why do you ask? I've seen one parked down the street a couple of times. It's just sitting there. No one gets out. Tanya's face darkened. Mick, listen to me. If you see that car again, you don't go near it. You come straight home. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, Malik said, his voice small. Tanya walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The street was quiet, but her gut told her something wasn't right. She glanced back at Richard, who was sitting in the corner deep in thought. Richard, she said, could Alan have people looking for you? Richard's head snapped up, his expression grim. If he knows I'm not dead, then yes, he'll stop at nothing to find me. Tanya took a deep breath, her protective instincts flaring. Mick, you're staying inside from now on. Unless I'm with you, no exceptions. But Mom, no exceptions, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Mick nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He didn't like being treated like a little kid, but the look on his mother's face told him this wasn't the time to argue. The next day Mick couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. At school, he caught himself glancing over his shoulder more than once. By the time the final bell rang, he was eager to get home. He took his usual route, cutting through a quiet side street lined with trees. Halfway down the block, a black car rolled slowly past him. Mick froze, his heart pounding, as the car came to a stop just ahead. The driver's side door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He looked around briefly before locking eyes with Mick. Hey kid, the man called, his tone too casual to be comforting. Got a second? Malik's instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the ground. No, I got to get home, he stammered, taking a step back. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. It'll just take a second, come. Here. Malik shook his head and turned to run, but another man appeared behind him, blocking the way. Easy kid, the second man said, we just want to talk. Panic surged through Malek as he realized they had boxed him in. Without thinking, he bolted to the left, ducking through a narrow gap between two fences. The men shouted behind him, their footsteps pounding on the pavement as they gave chase. Malek's lungs burned as he sprinted down the alley, zigzagging to keep them guessing. He spotted a dumpster up ahead and dove behind it, pressing himself against the cold metal. He covered his mouth, trying to stifle his ragged breaths, as the men's voices grew louder. "Where'd he go?" one of them barked. "Check the alley." Malek's heart thundered in his chest. As their footsteps came closer, he closed his eyes, praying they wouldn't find him after what felt like an eternity. The footsteps reeded. "He's gone. Let 10 get back to the car," one of them muttered. Mick stayed hidden until he was sure they were gone. When he finally emerged, his legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to keep moving. He ran all the way home, bursting through the front door and collapsing onto the floor. "Malik," Tanya cried, rushing to his side. "What happened? They tried to grab me," Malik gasped, his voice shaking. Tanya's face went pale. She looked at Richard, who was already standing, his expression grim. "Alan's men," Richard said. "It wasn't a question. This is getting too dangerous," Tanya said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Richard sat at the kitchen table, a faint frown etched across his face as he flipped through a notebook Tanya had given him. Malik sat across from him, watching as Richard scribbled dates and figures onto a fresh page. Tanya, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, broke the silence. "Are you sure you remember everything?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I don't have much choice," Richard replied, not looking up. "Alan was sloppy, but I need to make sure the pieces fit together. Before I hand anything over." He paused, rubbing his temple as the details slowly came back. There were unauthorized transfers, large sums moved to offshore accounts, ones I didn't recognize. Alan thought he was clever, but the paper trail is there. I had flagged these transactions before he attacked me, and those records are in your office." Tanya asked. Richard nodded. "Locked in a safe. If we can get them, it'll be enough to prove his guilt." "But how do we get them?" Malik asked. "Won't Alan be watching your house?" "He will," Richard admitted. "But that's where we'll need help." That evening, Tanya made a call. 30 minutes later, her brother James arrived, a retired detective. James carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen it all. "What's going on, Tanya?" James asked as he stepped into the living room. His sharp eyes quickly took in the tension in the room, and the stranger sitting at the table. "This is Richard." Tanya began, her tone serious. "He's in trouble. Big trouble, and we need your help." James listened as Tanya and Richard recounted the events of the past few days. By the time they were done, his expression was grim. "So let me get this straight," James said, leaning forward. "This Alan guy embezzled money from you, tried to kill you, and now he's got people out looking for you." "Exactly," Richard said, "and I have the evidence to bring him down, but it's locked in my house. I can't risk going back there alone." James scratched his chin thoughtfully. "All right, here's what we'll do. First, I'll have some of my old contacts keep an eye on the house. If Alan has people watching it, we'll know. Second, I'll help you plan a way to get those documents without getting caught." "And Malik?" Tanya asked, her voice tight. "I'll make sure he's safe," James assured her. He glanced at Malik, who was sitting quietly. "You've got guts, kid, but leave the dangerous stuff to us, all right?" Malik nodded, though the determined look in his eyes didn't waver. The next day, Tanya and Richard sat in the living room, a digital recorder between them. The plan was risky, but it might buy them enough time to gather the evidence they needed. "Are you sure about this?" Tanya asked, adjusting the microphone. Richard nodded. "The best way to put pressure on Alan, without giving away where I am. If he thinks the public knows about his crimes, he'll panic." Tanya hesitated before pressing the record button. "All right, whenever you're ready." Richard cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began to speak. "My name is Richard Greaves. If you're hearing this, it means I've survived an attempt on my life by Alan Foster, my son-in-law. For years I trusted Alan with my finances and my family. I believed he had my daughter's best interests at heart, but I was wrong." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Alan has embezzled millions from me, using my accounts to fund illegal ventures. When I confronted him, he tried to kill me, throwing me off the Riverway Bridge. But I survived, and I have the evidence to prove his guilt." Tanya gestured for him to wrap it up. "To Alan," Richard said, his voice firm. "You may think you've won, but the truth is coming, and when it does, there will be no escaping justice." He stopped, the tension in the room palpable. Tanya hit the stop button and exhaled. "That should do it." "What do we do with it?" Mick asked, entering the room. "Wex send It anonymously to a journalist I know. Richard said someone I can trust to release it without compromising our location. Tanya nodded, and while Alan scrambles to control the fallout, we'll move on the house and get the evidence later that evening. James returned with updates. Alan's people are watching the house, but they're sloppy. We can work around them. Richard nodded. Good then, it's time to move tonight. Tanya's eyes widened. Tonight, isn't that too soon? The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes, Richard said. We've already taken a big risk with the recording. We can't afford to lose momentum. James put a reassuring hand on Tanya's shoulder. I'll keep them safe, I promise. Malik watched as the adults finalized their plan, his heart pounding in his chest. The gravity of the situation finally hit him. This wasn't just about saving Richard anymore. This was about survival for all of them. Alan Foster stormed into his office, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. On the screen, the anonymous video message from Richard Gavs played on a loop. Every word, every syllable was a dagger to his carefully curated facade. How is this possible? He barked, slamming his fist onto his desk. He should be dead. His chief enforcer, a burly man named Decker, stood stiffly in the corner, avoiding Alan's seething glare. We're working on finding him, Decker said, his voice calm but tense. The broadcast came from somewhere near Riverway. We've narrowed it down to a few neighborhoods. Alan's eyes narrowed. A few neighborhoods. That's not good enough. I want this handled tonight. Find him, and make sure he doesn't have the chance to spread another word. Decker nodded, turning on his heel to relay the orders to his team. As he left, Alan leaned back in his chair, his breathing heavy. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. If Richard was alive with evidence in hand, it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The night was still when the first black SUV rolled into Tanya's quiet street, Malik peeking through. The curtains felt his stomach churn at the sight. They're here, he whispered, his voice shaking. Tanya immediately killed the lights, her heart pounding. Malik, get Richard and hide. Go to the crawl space under the stairs. Don't come out until I tell you. Malik nodded, grabbing Richard's arm. Come on, he whispered urgently. Richard hesitated. I can't let them. Now's not the time for pride, Tanya snapped. Go. As Malik and Richard disappeared into the shadows, Tun turned to her brother James, who was already loading his old revolver. Are you sure about this? T asked, her voice low. James nodded grimly. They're not leaving here with him. Stay behind me. A loud crash echoed through the house as the front door splintered open. 3 men stormed in, their faces cold and menacing. Where is he? The leader demanded, his voice echoing through the living room. Tanya stepped forward, her heart racing, but her chin held. Hi, get out of my house. The leader smirked. Lady, you're out of your depth. Hand him over and we'll leave without any trouble. James stepped into view, his revolver aimed squarely at the man's chest. Looks like you brought trouble with you now. Get out. The man's smile faltered as he took a step back, motioning for his men to spread out. Find him, he growled. The intruders began searching the house, overturning furniture and ripping open closets. Tanya's heart pounded as one of them headed toward the stairs. Hey, she shouted, grabbing a lamp from the side table and hurling it at him. It shattered against his shoulder, knocking him off balance before he could recover. James fired a warning shot into the air. That's enough, he bellowed. The next one won't miss. The leader raised his hands, a thin smile returning to his face. All right, old man. No need to get trigger happy, but the tension snapped like a rubber band when Decker appeared from the hallway, dragging Malik out of the crawl space by his arm. Found the kid, he sneered. Tanya's blood ran cold. Let him go. Decker laughed. Not until you tell us where the old man is. I'm right here. Richard's voice rang out as he stepped into the room. Tanya turned, her eyes wide with shock. Richard, no. Richard held his hands up, his gaze locked on Alan's men. Let the boy go. This is between me and Alan. Decker shoved Malik toward Tanya, who caught him and pulled him close. Smart man, Decker said, stepping forward. But before he could grab Richard, James fired another shot, this time grazing Decker's arm. Back off. Chaos erupted. The men lunged at James and Tanya, a scuffle breaking out in the cramped living room. Richard used the distraction to grab a fire poker, swinging it wildly and knocking one of the intruders to the ground. Let's go, the leader shouted, realizing they were outmatched. He and his men retreated, dragging Decker with them as they fled into the night. James locked the door behind them, breathing heavily. Is everyone okay? Tanya asked, her voice trembling. Malik nodded, though his hands were still shaking. Richard placed his steady hand on his shoulder. You were brave, kid. Thank you. The next morning, James called in a favor from an old friend in the force, tipping off the authorities about Alan's crimes and whereabouts. This has to be airtight, James said, handing over the folder. Richard had risked his life to retrieve no leaks. Alan can't know this is coming. By noon, the police raided Alan's estate, finding enough evidence to arrest him on charges of embezzlement and attempted murder. Alan was dragged out of his mansion in handcuffs, his usual smug demeanor replaced with a cold glare. "This is ridiculous," Alan shouted at the camera, swarming his driveway. "I've done nothing wrong," but as the evidence piled up, his protest tests grew weaker. Richard's testimony combined with the bank records and the anonymous video painted a damning picture that evening. Malik, Tanya, and Richard watched the news in silence as Alan was led into the courthouse. "They got him," Malik said, a hint of relief in his voice. Richard nodded, though his expression remained solemn. "It's not over yet. He'll fight this with everything he's got, but at least now the truth is out." Tanya placed a hand on his arm. "And he can't hurt you or us anymore." Richard gave her a small smile, though the weight of the ordeal still hung heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that justice might prevail. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back, their pens poised to capture every moment, while spectators whispered among themselves. The tension was palpable as the judge entered, calling the court to order. Alan sat at the defense table, his face impassive but his eyes cold. Richard, sitting across from him at the prosecution's table, met his glare with quiet resolve. The prosecution wasted no time. Over the first day, they meticulously laid out Alan's financial schemes. Shell companies, falsified transactions, and millions siphoned from Richard's accounts. Screens displayed graph, spreadsheets, and emails, each one tying Alan deeper into the web of deceit. On the second day, Richard took the stand. "Mr. Greaves," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Alan Foster. Richard adjusted his tie, his voice steady, despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Alan is married to my daughter Emma. I trusted him. I gave him control over my finances, believing he had my family's best interests at heart." "And when did you first suspect wrongdoing?" "About 6 months ago," Richard replied. "I noticed discrepancies in my accounts, money missing, unusual transactions. When I confronted Alan with the evidence, he denied everything, became hostile. That confrontation escalated." Richard paused, his voice faltering for the first time. "He attacked me and then he tried to kill me." The courtroom fell silent. "And what did he do, Mr. Grieve?" "He threw me off the riverway bridge," Richard said, his voice firm now. "He left me for dead." Alan's attorney rose to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor." "Speculation," the judge nodded. "Sustained." "The jury will disregard the witness's interpretation of the defendant's intent," Richard continued, undeterred. "If it weren't for Malik, I wouldn't be here today." All eyes turned to Malik, who sat nervously in the gallery. Mixed palms were slick with sweat as he approached the witness stand. His mother gave him a reassuring nod, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily on him. "State your name for the record." The prosecutor said. "Malik Johnson," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Malik, can you tell the court what you witnessed on the evening of Richard Greaves' attack?" Malik glanced at Richard, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. "I was fishing by the river," Mick began. "It was quiet and then I heard a loud crash. I looked up and saw a black car stopped on the bridge. Someone got out and went to the side of the bridge. Then they threw something over." The prosecutor leaned forward. "And what did you see next?" I saw a man in the water," Malik said, his voice growing steadier. "I didn't know who it was, but he wasn't moving. I jumped in to save him." The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness isn't identifying the defendant. He's corroborating the sequence of events." Overruled. The judge said. Malik continued, his confidence building. "Later, I saw pictures of Mr. Greaves on the news. That's when I realized he was the man I pulled out of the river." The trial reached its climax when the prosecution called an unexpected witness, Alan's former business associate, Thomas Crane. As Crane took the stand, Alan's calm exterior finally cracked, his eyes narrowing with fury. "Mr. Crane," the prosecutor began, "can you explain your relationship with the defendant I worked with?" "Alan on several business ventures," Crane said, his tone measured. "He approached me to help set up offshore accounts and shell companies to move funds from Mr. Greaves' accounts." "Were you aware that these actions were illegal?" Crane hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but Alan assured me no one would find out, and what happened when Mr. Gaffs confronted Alan about the discrepancies. Alan panicked. Crane said he told me he had to get rid of the problem. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but when I heard about the incident at the bridge, his voice faltered. I realized what he'd done. Why are you testifying today? Crane glanced at Alan, then back at the prosecutor. Because it's the right thing to do. I can't erase what I've done, but I can make sure the truth comes out. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the prosecutor rested their case. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with a verdict. The foreperson stood, her expression solemn as she read the decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Alan Foster, guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Alan slumped in his chair, his arrogance finally replaced with visible defeat. The judge wasted no time sentencing him to life imprisonment without parole. As the gavel struck, the courtroom exhaled collectively. Malik watched as Alan was led away in handcuffs, his once pristine suit now a symbol of his shattered empire. Later that evening, Mick sat on the porch of his home, staring out at the stars. Richard joined him, lowering himself carefully into the chair beside him. You okay, kid? Richard asked. Malik nodded, though his expression was pensive. I didn't think it would feel like this. Like what? Malik shrugged. I thought I'd feel happy, like it was all over, but it's not, is it? Richard smiled faintly. No, it's not. Things like this leave a mark, but you did something incredible, Malik. You saved me and you helped bring a dangerous man to justice. That's no small thing. Malik looked at him, his young face thoughtful. Do you think people like Alan ever change? Richard shook his head. I don't know, but what matters is that people like you exist, the kind who step up when it matters most. Malik smiled, a small but genuine expression. He felt the weight lifting, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. It was a sunny afternoon when Richard Greaves returned to Tanya's modest home, this time with no shadow of fear hanging over them. He arrived in a sleek but understated car, carrying an envelope and a warm smile. Malik greeted him at the door, surprised but genuinely happy to see the man he had saved weeks earlier. Richard, Malik said, stepping aside. Let him in. Good to see you, Malik. Richard replied, clapping a hand on the boy's shoulder. Is your mother home? Tanya appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Richard, she said warmly, though her tone still carried a hint of formality. What brings you back so soon? I wanted to express my gratitude properly, Richard said. Settling onto the couch, he placed the envelope on the coffee table, sliding it toward her. What's this? Tanya asked, eyeing it suspiciously. Open it, Richard urged, his smile widening. Tanya hesitated, then picked up the envelope and pulled out a neatly folded letter and a check. Her eyes widened as she scanned the figures, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard, this is too much. It's not nearly enough, Richard said firmly. You and Mick saved my life, Tanya. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here to see justice served. This is my way of ensuring that your family has everything it needs. Tanya's voice wavered. But this is more money than we've ever seen. I don't know if we can accept it. Richard shook his head. Consider it an investment. And it's not just money. He looked at Malik, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. Malik, I've arranged for you to attend St. Gabriel's Academy. It's one of the best schools in the state. You'll get a full scholarship and anything you need, books, transportation, supplies, it's all covered. Malik's jaw dropped. You mean I can go to St. Gabriel's for real? Richard said with a chuckle. It's the least I can do for someone as brave as you. Tanya blinked back, tears, her hand tightening around the letter. Richard, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Richard said softly, and let me do this for you. Tanya nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, thank you, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. A week later, Malik stood in the small bedroom he shared with his younger cousin, carefully packing a backpack for his first day at St. Gabriel's. His fingers brushed over the new notebooks and pristine uniform, and he paused, taking a deep breath. The past month felt like a whirlwind, saving a life, testifying in court, and now preparing for a fresh start at a school he'd never dreamed of attending. But more than the external changes, something inside him had shifted. Malik, Tanya called from the hallway. Hurry up, or you'll miss the bus coming. Malik shouted back, zipping the bag before he left. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. For the first time, he saw more than just a boy from a small town. He saw someone brave, someone capable of making a difference. As he headed to the bus stop, Malik thought about the bridge, the moment he dived into the water. without hesitation. That decision had changed everything, not just for Richard but for himself, he realized. Now that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about taking action, despite the fear. That Saturday Richard arrived at their home again. This time with a small gift box in hand. Malik was in the backyard tinkering with a fishing rod he hadn't touched in weeks. Still at it, huh? Richard said, stepping onto the lawn. Malik grinned. Yeah, it's how it all started, isn't it? It is, Richard said with a chuckle. He held out the box. I got you something. Malik took it, opening the lid to reveal a custom fishing lure engraved with his initials. Wow, Malik said, running his fingers over the metal. This is awesome. Thanks, Richard. You earned it, Richard said. He hesitated, his expression softening. Malik, I want you to know I think of you as family now, like the grandson I never had. Malik's throat tightened, but he managed to smile. Your family to me too. Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. I'll visit often, I promise, and if you ever need anything you call me. No matter what, I will, Malik said earnestly. That evening, Malik walked down to the riverbank alone. He stood on the bridge looking down at the water that had once terrified him, but now seemed calm and inviting. This was where it all began, the moment that turned his world upside down and set him on a path he never could have imagined. He thought about the man who had tried to kill Richard, now sitting behind bars. He thought about Richard's gratitude and the new opportunities waiting for him. But most of all, he thought about how one decision, one act of courage had changed not about just Richard's life, but his own. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mick smiled to himself. The river flowed on, endless and unyielding, just like life, and Malik was ready for whatever came next. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and subscribe for more. Story 2. My name is Milan Petro, and the day of my grandfather's will reading was the day my life broke into. I walked into that cold, echoing conference room with more nerves than I'd ever admit. Roman, my older brother, sat there in his tailored suit, legs crossed, owing the confidence of a man who always expected to win. I used to think we were close once when we were kids, building forts in the yard, dreaming of futures that felt equally bright. But somewhere along the way he learned how to step on my shoulders to climb higher. While I was still stuck thinking we were supposed to help each other, the lawyer read the will like it was a grocery list, his tone flat, his eyes never meeting mine. Roman got exactly what we all expected, a sleek 3-room apartment in the heart of the capital, newly renovated, prime location, probably worth more than I'd earn in a decade. I tried to feel happy for him, but all I could do was stare at the polished table and feel the shame burn my neck. Always been second best, even in the eyes of the man who taught me to read when it came to me. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and then delivered the final blow. Milan Petrov, you inherit the property at 12 Lesna Street, Sinish. He might as well have handed me a one-way ticket to nowhere. I saw the smirk flicker across Roman's lips, the same one he'd worn when he beat me at chess and told me to try harder. Next time I didn't even know where Sinishko was. The name sounded like a joke, some forgotten village with cracked roads and more ghosts than people. The lawyer handed me the envelope with the key inside like it was a punishment. I clenched it in my palm, the brass teeth digging into my skin. My eyes darted around the room, but no one met my gaze. When the reading was over, Roman swaggered over, clapping me on the shoulder with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Tough break, little brother, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Guess Grandpa wanted to teach you a lesson about hard work. He leaned in, his breath a mix of mint and arrogance. Maybe you'll finally grow up out there. Talia was waiting outside, arms folded, her lips a thin line of impatience. She'd always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way, like a marble statue I could never warm. She barely waited for the lawyer's door to click shut before she turned on me. A house in a dead village, she hissed, her eyes blazing with disappointment. What are you going to do with that? Milan, plant potatoes, sell honey on the roadside. I opened my mouth, but no words came. The key felt heavy in my pocket like a stone I couldn't throw away. I tried to picture what the house even looked like, dusty, broken, crawling with spiders. I thought of the apartment Roman would walk into, that night, glass windows, new appliances, a view of the city skyline. My chest burned. Talia shook her head, her voice low and sharp. You're a loser, you always have been. The words hit me harder than any punch. They settled into my bones, made themselves at home. You know what, Milan, just get out. I don't want to look at you tonight. It wasn't even dark yet, but the sky felt like it was closing in. I stumbled toward the street, my head spinning. Every step felt like a betrayal of the promises we'd made. Of the man I'd tried to be. I thought of the years I'd spent working late shifts, doing everything I could to give Talia the life she said she wanted, but the truth was, it was never enough. I was never enough. I heard the door slam behind me. That final heavy sound felt like the end of a chapter I hadn't realized I'd been writing. I stood there, numb, my breath forming small clouds in the evening air. The city bustled around me, cars honking, people laughing, neon signs flickering, but I felt like I was watching it all through thick glass. The key in my pocket pulsed like a secret waiting to be told. In that moment, I realized the life I'd known was gone. Talia's voice still echoed in my head, every syllable a cut. Roman's smirk lingered in my memory like a bruise that wouldn't fade. I was alone, stripped to the safety net I'd clung to, forced to face the world without the crutch of my old life. Maybe that's why I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. Maybe that's why I didn't call Roman to demand an explanation or beg Talia to let me in instead. I turned my face toward the darkness and started walking, the key in my pocket felt like a question. Who was I without them? Who was I without the life I'd built around being the second son, the quiet husband, the shadow, and someone else's story? I didn't have answers, only the cold certainty that everything had changed. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something I hadn't yet learned to want. I packed what little I had and left the city without looking back. The bus station smelled like cheap coffee and wet cement, the overhead speakers buzzing with half-hearted announcements. My duffel bag was light to light, like the life I'd built in the city had already been slipping through my fingers. The bus driver barely glanced at my ticket, his eyes glazed from too many hours on the road. I sank into a cracked vinyl seat and stared at the window as the bus pulled away, the city's skyline shrinking behind me like a fading promise. Talia's words kept looping in my head. You're dragging me down. Roman is building empires, and you're still reading books. The way she'd said it, like my love for stories, for history, for old things, was a weakness instead of a strength. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up late reading by the glow of a desk lamp, trying to understand the world through someone else's words. Maybe that was my problem. I'd spent too long living in the margins of other people's stories. The bus hummed across a landscape that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Flat gray fields rolled on for miles, faded houses, their paint peeling like old bandages, leaned under the weight of too many winters. Rusted tractors sat like abandoned toys. The occasional billboard advertised cheap beer, or the promise of a better life somewhere else. I wondered how many people had left Snishko, seeking something brighter in the city. I wondered if any of them had found it. I shifted in my seat, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. My reflection stared back at me, hollow eyes, unshaven jaw, a man who didn't look like he belonged anywhere. I tried to remember the last time I'd really smiled, not the polite paper-thin smile I gave Roman or Talia when they expected it, but a real one that started in my chest and spread to my face. It felt like a memory from another life. The bus rattled over a pothole, jolting me upright. I clutched the duffel bag like it held something precious, but all it carried were worn clothes and a notebook I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. The pages were filled with scribbles, half-finished stories, quotes from books, and notes from conversations I'd overheard and never found the courage to speak aloud. A record of the man I'd been trying to be, or maybe the man I was too afraid to let out. As we got closer to Salesnishko, the landscape changed. The fields gave way to clusters of birch trees, their white bark stark against the glow. The road narrowed, a single-lane strip of cracked asphalt, bordered by ditches filled with rainwater. Every mile felt like a step deeper into a forgotten world. I wondered what the house would look like. Would it even have a roof? Would the windows be shattered? Would the ghosts of the past greet me at the door? The bus slowed, and the driver grunted something that might have been the village's name. I stood, my legs stiff, and shuffled down the aisle. As I stepped off, the smell of wet earth and with smoke hit me, grounding me in a way the city never had. I watched the bus pull away, leaving a plume of exhaust that hung in the air like a goodbye. There was no one waiting for me, no sign with my name on it, just a dirt path that led away from the bus stop and into the trees. I stood there for a long time, duffel bag at my feet, listening to the wind rustle the branches. The air felt different here, thicker, older, like it carried the weight of every story that had ever been told in this place. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, arguments, whispered secrets. My grandfather's voice, low and patient, telling me about the world he'd seen with his own eyes. I wondered if he'd walked the same path, carrying his own doubts and hopes in a bag slung over his shoulder. I took a deep breath and started down the path. The mud sucked at my shoes, leaving dark prints behind me. I thought about Talia again, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You're a loser, you always have been." Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd never been the man she'd wanted me to be, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking toward something that was mine, not borrowed from Roman, not polished for Talia, but something that had waited just for me. The path twisted through the trees, leading me deeper into the heart of the village. I saw old wooden houses leaning at odd angles, their porches sagging under the weight of years. Windows stared at me like tired eyes. A few curtains twitched as I passed the inhabitants, curious or suspicious. I couldn't tell which. No one came out to greet me, but I didn't mind. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to find out what this place had to say to me. Finally I saw it, the house, my house. It squatted at the end of the lane, like a forgotten memory. 2 stories, a slope roof with missing shingles, and a fence half swallowed by weeds. The windows were stir with grime, and the paint had peeled so badly it looked like a sick animal skin, but still, it stood waiting, just like my grandfather had written in his letter. I dropped the duffel bag at the gate and stared at the house. A part of me wanted to laugh. What kind of man leaves his grandson a ruin? But another part of me felt the tremor of gratitude. This wasn't a gift in the shape of a house, it was a challenge. A question. "Who are you, Milan? What do you have to offer?" I stepped forward and pushed open the gate. It groaned on rusty hinges, protesting every inch of movement. The path to the front door was overgrown with weeds and dandelions, but I walked it anyway. Each step felt like I was stepping into the life I was meant to live, and even though I didn't have answers, even though the air smelled of old wood and rain and ghosts, I felt something crack open inside me. Maybe this was exile, or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of freedom. The house sat hunched behind overgrown hedges, its roof sagging shutters broken like cracked eyelids. I stopped at the edge of the yard, my boots sinking into the damp earth. A cold wind rattled the broken shutters, making them sound like old bones chattering in the dark. I gripped the handle of my duffel bag, the fabric worn thin from years of half-hearted travel, and took a step closer. Every footfall felt like stepping into a different century, a different life. I reached the porch and paused, my heart pounding. I'd spent the entire bus ride imagining this place as a ruin, but even ruins can carry a kind of dignity. The boards creaked under my weight as I climbed the steps, each one groaning as if it hadn't felt a foot in decades. The door was painted a dull green once, but now the paint peeled away like an old scab. I touched the handle, cold metal, a relic from some forgotten craftsman, and turned it. The door swung open with a sigh inside. The air smelled of old pine dust, and something warmer, like a memory of laughter, left behind. A single shaft of light sliced through the gloom from a crack in the curtains, illuminating a swirl of dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. I stepped over the threshold and felt the house breathe. Around me, every wall, every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper, "Welcome back." I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and took a slow turn, letting my eyes adjust the furniture. Though worn, was intact. A threadbare sofa slouched in the living room, its cushions slumped like a tired man's shoulders. A wooden table bore the scars of countless dinners and arguments that would darkened in places by what might have been spilled wine or candle wax. It was the kind of place where memories were built and broken, where a family's laughter and anger and love clung to the walls like smoke. I ran my fingers across the mantelpiece, feeling the grooves and scratches. A faded photograph of my grandfather rested there, the glass cracked, but the image still strong. His eyes, fierce and kind, all at once seemed to follow me as I moved. I remembered him sitting on a bench in the city park, telling me stories about the war, about the old days when honor meant something. He'd always had that smell, tobacco and pine resin, like the woods themselves had claimed him as one of their own. I let my fingers drift from the mantel to the bookshelf that lined the far wall. At first it looked like any old shelf, filled with dog-eared novels and cheap paperbacks, but then I saw it, a seam in the wall that didn't quite fit, a line that ran too straight to precise. I leaned in, my breath catching. It was like the house itself was keeping a secret. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached out and pressed the seam, half expecting it to vanish like a trick of the light, but the panel shifted under my touch, a faint click echoing in the silent room. I pushed again, harder this time, and the hidden door creaked open on rusty hinges. Behind it was a small passage, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. My pulse quickened as I ducked inside. The air changed as I stepped into the hidden space. It felt thicker, charged with something electric. I could smell old paper and leather, the scent of time itself. I reached out and flicked on the single bulb overhead, its glow struggling against the darkness, and then I saw it. Books, not a couple of dusty volumes on a forgotten shelf, but a library floor to ceiling, every wall lined with shelves, each one packed with books in every size and language: Latin, Greek, Russian, even Arabic. Some had leather bindings, so old they looked ready to crumble at a touch. Others gleamed with gold-embossed titles that made me catch my breath. My grandfather had built this hidden, it preserved it. I reached out and ran my fingers along the spines, like I was touching ghosts. Titles I hadn't seen in years leaped out at me: histories of the old empire, collections of poetry, treatises on philosophy and science. Every subject that had fascinated me as a boy was here waiting. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride, maybe, or purpose. A part of me that had been sleeping all these years woke up in that room, stretching its limbs and remembering who I was in the corner, half hidden behind an old map of the Carpathians. I saw something that made my breath hitch: a steel safe, big and imposing, its door gleaming dully in the weak light. I stepped closer, my hand trembling, my mind raced with questions. What could my grandfather have locked away in there? More books, old money, secrets? I reached out and traced the edges of the safe store, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips. A combination dial waited, silent and patient. I knew Roman's birthday by heart, Talius too, but would that be the key, or was it something only I would know? I leaned my forehead against the safe for a moment, letting the cold sink into my skin. The house felt alive, watching me, waiting for my next move. I pulled back and took a step away, the bulb overhead flickering like it couldn't make up its mind whether to shine or die. The library, the safe, the books, they were all pieces of a puzzle my grandfather had left for me, and I realized, standing there in the dim light, that he hadn't left me a burden. He left me an inheritance of questions, a legacy of curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to write my own story. I turned off the light and let the door swing shut behind me. The scene clicked back into place, hiding the library from the world once more. I felt a shiver run through me as I stepped back into the living room, the photograph of my grandfather watching from the mantel. All right, I whispered, let's see what you were trying to tell me. Behind the false wall was a library, not a couple of dusty books on a shelf. A library. My grandfather had been a collector, an archivist, maybe even a hoarder, but in that small hidden room, he was something more, a preserver of secrets. I felt like I'd stumbled into a cathedral built from paper and ink. The air itself seemed charged, like it hummed with stories waiting to be told. I took a tentative step inside the floorboards, protesting under my weight. The scent hit me first. Old leather, the sharp tang of ancient glue, the soft musk of aging paper. My grandfather's scent. I remembered him reading to me as a child, his voice deep and patient. Those stories had taught me to dream, to believe in the power of words, and now here I was, surrounded by his legacy. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each one lined with spines in every language I could think of, and some I couldn't. Latin titles winked at me like old friends. Russian history stared at me solemnly. Arabic scrolls rested in delicate boxes. My fingers traced the edges, absorbing the weight of their age. It was like touching ghosts, my grandfather's and my own. I let my eyes drift across the titles, and something inside me ate. I thought of Roman, how he'd have laughed at this place. Books, he'd sneer. What are you going to do with books? You can't eat them. You can't sell them. But Roman never understood that some things weren't measured in rubles or square meters. Some things had a value that couldn't be sold or traded. Only lived in the corner of the library, half shrouded in shadow. I noticed a steel safe, big, heavy. Its surface was cold and unyielding, a combination dial sat like a judge waiting to decide my fate. I reached out and laid my hand on it, the metal biting into my palm. I tried to imagine what he'd hidden there: money, family documents, a final letter. My mind raced with possibilities, each one a key that might open the door to something I'd never understood. I turned away for a moment and let my eyes wander back to the books. My grandfather's passion burned from every shelf. There were tomes on Slavic mythology, treatises on philosophy, and even a collection of love letters bound in red leather with a gold clasp, like a secret waiting To be told, I pulled one book down at random, The History of the Petrov Family, My Name, Our Story. I sat down on the cold wooden floor and opened it, the pages whispering. As they turned, there were black and white photographs pasted between chapters. My grandfather in a soldier's uniform standing beside a tank. My great-grandmother in a headscarf, her eyes proud and tired. Each page felt like an invitation into a world I'd never really known. I realized how little I'd asked him about his past. Always too busy with my own small worries to listen to the man who'd come before me. Guilt heavy and sour settled in my stomach. The library felt like a confession and a challenge all at once. My grandfather had spent his life collecting these stories. These pieces of who we were, and he'd hidden them away, waiting for the one person who'd bothered to look. This house isn't broken. He'd written it's waiting. I finally understood it wasn't just waiting for repairs or a fresh coat of paint. It was waiting for me. To wake up, I set the family history book aside and pulled another from the shelf. A collection of letters tied with a green ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words still carried weight. I read the first line: to my beloved, whose voice I still hear in the wind. My grandfather had loved someone deeply, fiercely, and here it was hidden behind a false wall, waiting for someone to care. I thought of Talia and how quickly she'd walked away. When the money ran dry, I wondered if I'd ever known love like that. I leaned back against the shelf. The smell of old paper filling my lungs. The walls of the library seemed to close in on me, wrapping me in the warmth of generations. I wasn't just Milan Petrov, the man with the broken marriage and the failed city life. I was a Petrov, grandson of a man who'd survived wars, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd found love in the midst of chaos and held on to it with both hands. I turned back to the safe, its steel door glinting in the dim light. My grandfather had left me this room, this library, and this final mystery. I felt the weight of it like a stone in my chest. Whatever was inside that safe, it was meant for me. Not Roman, not Talia, me. I knelt before it, running my fingers over the dial, each number cold and sharp under my skin. I tried Roman's birthday, nothing. Talia's, still nothing. Then I tried mine, a quiet click like the safe was sighing in relief. The door groaned open, revealing a trove of letters, deeds, antique catalogs, and a thick envelope marked for Milan and Milan only. I lifted it with trembling hands. My name and my grandfather's steady script stared back at me. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in my throat. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. I sat back on the floor, the envelope heavy in my hands, and closed my eyes. The air around me felt alive, buzzing with anticipation. When I finally opened the envelope, the pages inside felt warm, like they'd been waiting for my touch. His words were careful, deliberate, and full of a kind of love I'd forgotten could exist. He told me why Roman got the apartment, and I got the house. Roman, he wrote, had lost his roots, always chasing status and praise, but I, Milan, had always asked about the past, about the stories that made us who we were. This house isn't broken, he reminded me again. It's waiting. I let the letter fall into my lap and looked around the library, the shelves, the books, the dust. All of it felt like a map he'd drawn for me, a map to find myself. I realized then that I wasn't just here to inherit a house, I was here to inherit a legacy, and for the first time in years I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. I stared at the envelope in my hand. The paper yellowed at the edges like it had aged, along with my grandfather. I turned it over, tracing the way he'd written my name. Milan, not Misha, not Petrov, just Milan. Like he was speaking directly to the man I'd always wanted to be, not the man I'd let the world reduce me to. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open, the paper crackling like dry leaves inside. The letter was long, written in my grandfather's strong, deliberate script. He started by telling me how proud he was of me, not because I'd made a fortune or a name, but because I'd always asked questions. You never took anything at face value, he wrote. Even as a boy you wanted to know why. That's rare, Milan, that's a gift. I felt tears sting my eyes. When was the last time someone told me I was good at something that wasn't measured in bank accounts or promotions? Talia had called me a dreamer, like it was a curse. Roman had rolled his eyes whenever I brought up the past, but here was my grandfather reminding me that curiosity wasn't weakness, it was strength. He explained why he'd left. Roman, the apartment, your brother needs walls to hide behind. He wrote, he needs windows to show off. You need roots, you need history, you need the stories that make a man. I folded the letter against my chest and let the words sink in. All those years, I'd thought I'd come second. Maybe I'd been first all along, in the only way that mattered. The safe held more than just the letter. There were deeds to the property, old receipts for repairs, notes written in the margins of books about the village plans he'd made, questions he'd asked. Just like me, it felt like finding a secret conversation between us, one that had been waiting for me to continue, a conversation that told me I wasn't alone. Even now I leaned against the safe, the cold steel pressing into my back. My mind churned with everything he'd written. This house isn't broken, he'd said. It's waiting. Waiting for what? For me to come back and find myself again. For me to prove to the world and to myself that I wasn't the failure Talia had painted me to be. A noise startled me, a floorboard creaking overhead. I froze, my pulse pounding. I listened for a moment, but the silence settled back in like a heavy blanket. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Maybe it was just the house shifting, stretching its bones after so many years of neglect. Or maybe it was my grandfather's spirit watching over me. I found comfort in that thought. I gathered the documents, tucking them carefully into a canvas bag I'd brought with me. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet, but they felt too precious to leave behind. As I turned to leave the library, I paused at the threshold and looked back one last time. The books, the maps, the stories, they were part of me now. I closed the hidden door and heard the click as it locked back into place, like a promise that it would still be there when I needed it. I carried the bag upstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small window streaked with years of grime. I pulled out the letter and read it again, slower. This time, every word felt like a lifeline. My grandfather had trusted me with this place, with its secrets. He trusted me to honor the past while building something new. I made myself a cup of tea, weak and bitter, but it was something warm. I stared at the steam curling up, thinking about what came next. I could sell the house, walk away, and start over somewhere else. Roman would probably love that. He'd swoop in and buy it up for cheap, add it to his growing list of conquests. But my grandfather hadn't left it to Roman, he'd left it to me. That meant something. I thought about the way the village had looked when I'd arrived, tired and slumped, like an old man waiting for the end. But there had been a spark too, and the way the wind rattled the trees and the smell of woodsome smoke, a spark that said maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the house and the village were waiting for someone to remember them. I set my cup down and opened the old receipts. They told a story of repairs half in it, of plans interrupted by sickness or politics or bad luck. My grandfather had tried to keep the place alive, even when the world had started to forget. I felt a panging of guilt. I'd forgotten to, but I could remember now. I could pick up where he left off. I pulled out a pen and a notebook and started making a list. Roof repairs, shutters, windows, a new coat of paint. It was a long list, and I had no idea how I'd pay for it all. But as I wrote, I felt something shift inside me for the first time in years. I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix things. I wasn't waiting for Talia to approve or Roman to help. I was making my own plan, my own future. I heard the wind pick up outside, rattling the branches against the windows. I thought of my grandfather sitting here, pen in hand, making his own lists. The thought made me smile. Maybe he'd felt the same stubborn hope I felt now. Maybe he'd known that even when everything looked broken, there was always a way forward if you cared enough to try. I read his letter one last time before carefully folding it and placing it in the safe. Then I locked it, listening to the satisfying click that felt like closure. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. This house isn't broken, it's waiting. And now I was ready to answer that call. As I stood there in the quiet, I realized that I wasn't just holding a letter, I was holding a torch, a chance to bring light back to a place that had gone dark, and maybe, just maybe, to a part of myself that I thought was lost forever. I decided not to sell it, not to run. I was going to restore this place, rebuild it with my own hands, or at least find someone who could. The idea rooted itself in my mind like an old oak, steady, unyielding. I'd spent my life chasing approval, waiting for someone else to define me, Talia, Roman, even my grandfather in his quiet way, but this time it would be me who decided what mattered. The next morning I walked into the village square, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The place was as tired as I remembered. Shops with faded signs, shutters that hadn't been opened in weeks, and faces lined with suspicion and resignation. I felt their eyes on me, weighing me, measuring me, the outsider who'd come back to claim a piece of a place they'd given up on. I found Greer near the well, his gnarled hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. He'd been the ville's caretaker in his own way for longer than anyone could remember. His eyes narrowed as I approached, but there was a softness there, to a hint of the man who'd bounced me on his knee when I was a boy. Greer, I said, my voice steady, I need your help. He looked at me over the rim of his mug with what melan I took. A breath. The house, I want to fix it, restore it. I can't do it alone. He snorted a sound like dry leaves. That old place, it's falling apart. Takes more than paint and nails to make her stand again. I know, I said, but I have to try something. Shifted in his eyes, then a flicker of respect, maybe even hope. Your grandfather's boy, all right, he muttered. He gestured for me to sit. Tell me what you need. We sat on a splintered bench, the morning sun creeping over the rooftops. I told him about the roof, the shutters, the windows that rattled in the wind. I told him about the books and the safe, and the way the house had felt like it was waiting for me. Greer listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the horizon, like he was seeing the past layered over the present. When I finished, he nodded once, slow and deliberate. You need Elia, he said. He's the only one who can do justice to that house. Elia, I repeated. The name was unfamiliar, but it felt like a key turning in a lock. He's a restorer from the next town over. His hands that can make old things new again. Greer's eyes met mine. Your grandfather trusted him. That's saying something. Hope sparked in my chest. Can you bring him here? Greer shrugged. I can ask no promises. That's all I need, I said. I reached out and shook his hand, feeling the roughness of his skin, the years of hard work etched into every line. Thank you, he grunted, but there was a smile hiding in the corners of his mouth. Don't thank me yet, boy. This house, it's not just a building, it's memory. It's blood and sweat. If you want to bring it back, you'd better be ready to give it everything. I am, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. 2 days later, Greer arrived at my doorstep with Elia in tow. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with a lean build and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His hands were long and scarred, like they'd shaped 1,000 things and broken 1,000 more. He walked around the house in silence, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood, the cracks in the plaster, the way the roof sagged like a tired old man. When he came back to where I stood, he crossed his arms and studied me. Your grandfather built this, right? He said at last. She just needs a reason to stand. Again, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Can you help me? He nodded once. I can help, but you have to understand, this isn't about making it look new, it's about making it live again. I know, I said. I want to honor what he built. His gaze softened. Then we're in agreement. We spent hours going over the house, room by room. Elia pointed out the beams that needed reinforcing, the windows that could be salvaged, the floors that would have to come up and be laid anew. He spoke of the house like it was a living thing, like every board and nail had a story to tell as he talked. I felt a kind of excitement I hadn't known in years. Each problem wasn't an obstacle, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every crack in the wall felt like a challenge, every creak of the floor a reminder that this place had survived too much to give up. Now we made lists, supplies, tools, time frames. It was overwhelming, but it felt right. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Elia, I had Greer, and in a way I had my grandfather, his presence lingering in every shadow, every sin of old wood and pine resin. That night, I sat by the fireplace with the safe open beside me, the letter from my grandfather resting on my knee. The wind rattled the shutters, but it didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like the house was clearing its throat, getting ready to speak. I ran my fingers over the paper, reading his words again and again. This house isn't broken, it's waiting. I thought of Talia, her sharp words and sharper exit. I thought of Roman, his smug grin, and the way he'd always treated me like an afterthought. And I thought of myself, the man I'd been, and the man I was becoming, a man who wasn't afraid to build something from the ground up, a man who was ready to fight for the things that mattered. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls. I leaned back in my chair and let the warmth soak into my bones. Outside, the night stretched its long fingers across the village, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt ready. This house, it wasn't just a roof and walls, it was history. It was legacy, and now it was mine to protect, to rebuild, to make whole again. I let the fire burn low and closed my eyes, imagining what this place could become, and in that darkness, I saw not just a house reborn, but a man remade, one plank, one nail, one memory at a time. I took pictures of the rarest books, and sent them to collectors in St. Petersburg. In Warsaw, it felt like a betrayal at first, like I was selling off pieces of my grandfather's soul, but I needed money and the house needed saving. I couldn't fix the roof with sentiment. I couldn't patch the walls with memories. I needed cash, and the books were the only thing of value I had left. Ilya understood. He never judged me for the calls I made or the buyers I met. He'd watch me pack the books carefully into crates, his hands steady, but his eyes sad. Your grandfather would have done the same, he said one evening, his voice low and certain. He wanted this place to live. If that means letting go of some of the past, so be it. I nodded, but my heart still clenched every time I parted with one of those volumes. Each one carried a story, a lesson, a fragment of who I'd been, but I had to remind myself that the house was the real inheritance, the bones that held the memories. Together, without it, all those books would just be paper in the wind. Caspar Voss arrived 2 days after my first email. He was older than I'd expected, tall and stooped, with thin hair the color of old straw. His eyes, though, were sharp as broken glass. He carried a leather satchel, scuffed and battered, but his hands were delicate like a surgeon's. He barely spoke. As he flipped through the books I'd laid out on the dining room table, he examined each one like a jeweler inspecting gems, turning them over with reverence and a hint of greed. Every so often he'd nod to himself and make a note in his little black notebook when he picked up a small leather-bound book with gold filigree on the spine. His face changed. He ran his fingers across. The cover is breath-catching, this, he whispered. This alone could buy you a small house in the capital. I felt a jolt of excitement and dread all at once. What is it? An original print from the 17th century, he said, his voice hushed like a prayer. Russian, with notes in the margins by a royal scribe. A piece of history, my friend. My chest tightened. I thought of my grandfather, carefully cataloging every book in this library, preserving the stories that had survived wars, revolutions, and decades of indifference. Selling this felt like erasing a piece of him, but I remembered his words, this house isn't broken, it's waiting, and I knew what he meant. He trusted me to choose what mattered most. Caspar looked at me, his eyes glinting. Name your price. I hesitated. Every cell in my body screamed at me to hold on, to protect this treasure, but the roof leaked, the walls cracked. The house needed to stand before the stories inside it could breathe again. 5 million rubles, I said, my voice steady. His eyebrows shot up. A high price, but fair. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. He opened his satchel, pulled out a checkbook, and started writing. I watched the pen move across the paper, each stroke a door closing on the past and opening on the future. When he handed me the check, it felt heavy in my hand. You've made the right choice, he said. This book will be cared for, displayed in a museum. Perhaps it deserves to be seen. I nodded. Thank you. After he left, I sat at the table and stared at the check. 5 million rubles, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to fix the roof, the shutters, the floors. Enough to bring this house back to life. Ilya found me there, the letter from my grandfather still on the table beside me. He glanced at the check, then at me. It's not easy, is it? I shook my head. It feels like losing a part of him, but you're giving life to the rest of it. He said, you're choosing what to save. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words. Choosing what to save, that's what my grandfather had done over and over in every line he'd written, every book he'd collected, and now it was my turn. The next day I called the carpenter, I called the roofer. I called every man in the village who'd ever held a hammer or a paintbrush. I told them we were bringing the house back to life. Some came out of curiosity, others because they owed my grandfather a favor. A few just came because they wanted to see if the crazy city boy could really pull it off. I watched them work, watched Ilya guide them with quiet authority. He taught them how to handle the old wood, how to strip the rot without tearing away the history. Every beam, every plank was a piece of my grandfather's story, and Ilya treated it like it was his own. At night, I sat by the fireplace with the safe open beside me. The letter was always there, a reminder of the man who believed in me. Sometimes when the wind rattled the shutters, I thought I heard his voice, soft, patient, urging me on. I sent more books to Caspar over the next few weeks, each one harder to part with than the last. But with every check he handed me, the house grew stronger. The roof stopped leaking, the windows stopped rattling, the walls stood firm against the wind, and slowly so did I. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ilya stood beside me on the front porch. The house behind us glowed in the fading light, its windows like warm eyes watching Over the village, your grandfather would be proud, he said. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I hope so, he would, Ilya said. You're not just restoring a house, you're restoring a legacy. I let the words settle in my chest, feeling the truth of them for the first time in my life. I wasn't second best, I wasn't Roman's shadow or Talia's burden. I was Milan Petrov, guardian of the stories, the house, the family, and I was right where I was meant to be, Roman called me one evening, his voice dripping with that mix of forced politeness and hidden envy I'd come to know so well. I was in the middle of sanding a beam on the second floor, the old wood, giving off a smell that reminded me of every summer I'd spent here with my grandfather. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart tightening at the sound of my brother's voice. Hey, little brother. He began stretching the words like he was testing them. Listen, I've been thinking. I leaned back, wiping sweat from my brow at the back of my hand. About what? The will, he said, and I could almost hear him shifting in his leather chair in the city apartment that had been gifted to him like a trophy. Maybe it wasn't fair. Maybe we should trade you. Give me the house, I give you the apartment. Think about it. A place in the capital brand. New appliances, a view of the skyline you beset. I stared at the floorboards, a soft smile forming on my lips. He didn't understand. He'd never understand roaming, I said, my voice steady. This place has root stories, it has me in it. I'm not trading that for high-rise loneliness, he scoffed. You've always been sentimental, Milan. You think the past matters, but it doesn't. The future is in the city, in the deals you make, in the people you know. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words for so long. I'd let them define me, but now I had something he'd never have. Maybe you're right, I said, but I don't care. This house, it's where I belong. His silence crackled on the line, and for a moment, I thought he might say something real, something human, but then he laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. Suit yourself, little brother, just don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. I hung up before he could finish. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling lighter than I had in years. Roman couldn't touch me here. Talia couldn't reach me with her sharp tongue. This house, this village, it was mine, and it was enough. Ilya found me on the porch later, the sunset, painting the sky in streaks of gold and red. That was your brother, wasn't it? He asked, his voice calm like he'd been expecting this moment. Yeah. I said he wanted to trade the apartment for the house. Ilya snorted. He doesn't understand, no. I agreed, a slow smile spreading across my face. He doesn't. We sat there for a while, the two of us silent in the growing darkness. The house creaked around us, the wind rattling the shutters like an old friend. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing approval, trying to be someone I wasn't. Roman had always been the golden boy, the one who knew how to charm a room, the one who got the applause, but out here in this place that didn't matter. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he built this house with his own hands, about the library he'd hidden behind the false wall. I thought about the letter. He left me the way he'd known me, better than I'd known myself. I felt his presence in the wood, in the books, in the very air. I breathed, and I knew he'd chosen me for this place. Because he trusted me to see its worth. That night, I lit a fire in the hearth, and let its warmth fill the room. The flames danced across the walls, casting shadows that looked like memories. I imagined my grandfather sitting here, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea, telling me stories of the old days. I could almost hear his voice, deep and patient, reminding me that the past wasn't a chain, but a foundation. I let that thought settle in my chest, a quiet comfort. The next morning, I met Ilya. In the yard, he was already at work, his hands moving over the frame of a window that had seen better days. He glanced up at me and nodded, ready to get your hands dirty. I smiled, rolling up my sleeves. Always. We worked side by side, tearing away rot and replacing it with new wood, sanding rough edges, fitting glass paints. Every stroke of the hammer felt like a declaration. I belonged here. Ilya taught me to read the grain of the wood, to listen to the way it spoke when you pressed your palm against it. He showed me how to coax life back into something everyone else thought was too far gone. As the days passed, the house began to change. The roof no longer sagged, the walls stood tall and proud, the windows shone with new glass reflecting the sky. I'd walk through the rooms at night, running my fingers along the doorframes, feeling the strength in the beams. Ilya was right. This house wasn't just a structure. It was a living thing, and every repair was a promise to the past. One evening after the day's work was done, I found myself back in the library. The safe sat open beside me, the letter from my grandfather resting on my lap. I read it again, every word sinking deeper into my bones. You need roots. He'd written, you need stories. I thought of Roman's offer of the city apartment, with its shiny appliances and empty hallways. It would have been easier in some ways, no rotting wood, no creaking floors, but it wouldn't have been mine, it wouldn't have been home. I heard Ilya's footsteps in the hall, and looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me with that quiet knowing look he always had. You're thinking too hard. He said. I chuckled. Maybe I'm finally thinking about the right things. He nodded, pushing himself off the doorframe. You've got a good thing here, Milan. Don't let anyone tell you different. Thanks. I said, my throat tight. I'd never been good at accepting compliments, but Ilya's words felt honest, earned. He turned to leave but paused. Your brother, he'll come back. Men like him always do. I met his gaze, steady and calm. Let him, he can't take this from me. Ilya smiled, a small proud curve of his lips. Good. After he left, I sat in the library, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought of all the stories. The walls held all the laughter and tears, and whispered secrets. I thought of my grandfather, of the trust he'd placed in me. I felt his pride, like a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I closed the safe and stood feeling stronger than I had in years. Roman could keep his apartment. Talia could chase her ambitions. I had this house, this legacy, this life, and I was done apologizing for it. As I stepped out into the night, the stars overhead shone like tiny promises. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the voices of the past, and I knew I was right where I needed to be in the safe world. Photographs tucked between letters like silent witnesses to a life I'd never fully known. I lifted them one by one, each a window into a moment that felt more real than the years I'd wasted trying to be someone else. Me as a boy perched on my grandfather's knee in that very library, his eyes crinkled with laughter, mine wide and trusting. Another showed him standing on the front porch, hammer in hand, the house behind him a work in progress just like me. I spread the photos across the desk, the wood warm under my palms. Each image told a story I'd almost forgotten. My grandfather's smile, the way he'd looked at the house like it was a living thing. I saw my younger self, to nose in a book, oblivious to the world. Talia had always said I was too serious to quiet. Roman had called me a bore, but here in these photographs I saw a boy who'd been proud of his curiosity, who believed in the power of stories. That boy felt closer now than he had in years. I found original certificates for the books I'd been selling, proof of their provenance, stamps from royal collections, handwritten notes in the margins. I thought I was letting go of the past by selling them. Now I realized I was saving it, giving the stories new life in places they'd never been. My grandfather would have understood that. He'd have known that sometimes saving something means setting it free. Tucked at the bottom of the safe was a small box wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. My hands trembled as I untied the knot inside. I found a ring, simple gold, worn smooth by time, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the fragile edges. It was a letter from my grandfather. This was my father's. It began. The ink faded, but the words steady. He wore it every day through war and famine and the long nights that followed. He believed it carried the strength of every Petro before him. Now it's yours. Wear it when you need to remember who you are. I held the ring in my palm. Its weight more than just metal. It was a promise, a legacy. I slipped it on my finger and felt a warmth spread through me, a connection to the men who'd come before me. My father, his father, and now me, a line that wouldn't be broken. I packed the letters, the photographs, the ring back into the safe. The house creaked around me as if it approved. Every wall, every floorboard seemed to sigh with relief. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was here, right where I was meant to be. Ilya found me in the library, my hands still resting on the safe edge. What did you find? He asked, his voice low with respect. Proof. I said, proof that my grandfather didn't just leave me a house, he left me a legacy. Ilya nodded, his eyes kind. Then let's make sure it stands. We worked through the night, patching cracks in the walls, oiling the hinges that had grown stiff with neglect. Ilya's hands were steady, every movement a quiet testament to his craft. I followed his lead, learning the language of the house, the creak of old wood, the sigh of settling dust, the way the wind slipped through the eaves like a whispered prayer as dawn broke. I stood by the window, the light painting the sky and shades of rose and gold. I thought of Roman, his voice always sharp with ambition, always trying to drag me into his world. I thought of Talia,